Feel a little bit like Columbus, set down in a strange, new land full of new wonders, new discoveries. It's a challenge, all right. Challenge to my training. Sometimes challenges can get mighty big. But I'm gonna stay alive, believe me. That's for the morale officer.
In 1930, the documentary With Byrd at the South Pole was released to the general public, showing footage of Richard Byrd's Antarctic expedition, including the first flyby footage of the very pole itself. The film was successful, even winning an Academy Award, but it went to prove something that the human race had been slowly realizing for a while now. The world was becoming a smaller and smaller place. The Arctic and Antarctic expeditions of the early 20th century were the last great expeditions of their kind, the last bits of unconquered land on our planet, the last refuge of the explorer. And not only were the poles being explored, but here was footage of the place itself, a matter-of-fact image for the general public. For centuries, our adventure stories took place in exotic lands, either purely fantastical or exaggerations from the explorers who had been there themselves. The excitement of the mysterious world goes all the way back to things like the Odyssey, stories of the Cyclops and Calypso. As the years rolled on, the young white European was fascinated by tales of wild natives and their primitive, dangerous means, and it wasn't too hard to imagine worlds of tiny people or dragons or any number of things. It's in this time that Daniel Defoe wrote Robinson Crusoe, a tale of a castaway trapped on a tropical island for decades, encountering savage cannibals and mutineers. However, as the world got smaller, as the human race put every inch of it under the microscope and began to study its truths, it became apparent that these kinds of stories couldn't hold as much suspense and intrigue as they once did. The mystery of the world was fading away, and the adventure authors and readers had two choices. They could look into high fantasy, to worlds completely separated from our own, worlds like Middle-earth, Narnia, or Oz. Or they could look to what was still unexplored. They could look up. Films and science fiction developed almost completely parallel to each other. A Trip to the Moon, commonly considered the first sci-fi film, and certainly the first on the exploration of space, came out as early as 1902. The silent era brought us such films as Alita, and Fritz Lang's Woman in the Moon. The 1930s hearkened to the movie serials, which saw the likes of Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers. In 1968, 2001: A Space Odyssey helped radically change the face of science fiction in film, presenting the genre as a means to present themes of humanity, spirituality, and the philosophical, changing the question from, is there life in outer space, to, if there is life in outer space, what does that mean to me? Granted, literary science fiction had been doing that for a while now, but it wasn't nearly as common in motion pictures. However, 4 years before Space Odyssey, Paramount released what I personally believe to be the ultimate science fiction as a replacement of the Tales of Fantastical Journeys of Old film, and it couldn't have had a more apt name.
Robinson Crusoe on Mars. Robinson Crusoe on Mars.
Robinson Crusoe on Mars tells the story of Commander Kit Draper, played by Paul Manty, who is forced to make an emergency landing during an orbital mission of Mars when a meteor nearly runs into their ship. His co-pilot, Colonel Dan McReady, played by Batman, is killed in the landing, leaving Draper with no water, no source of heat, no reserves of air, limited rations of food, and only the ship's monkey in a spacesuit, Mona, as company. The first half of this film follows Draper's struggle to survive, and it's one of the better shipwreck narratives I've seen. The Mars in the film is a vicious landscape of random jets of fire, jagged cliff faces, and not a single soul to save you, to call out to. The Mars presented here isn't all that inaccurate based on what scientists thought Mars was like at the time. The red of Mars is the atmosphere as opposed to the soil. The air is thin and barely breathable. There is water, but it is hard to find. But water means plants, which means food.
Could use a little paprika.
For the first hour, Draper manages to make a home for himself, finally making himself comfortable as a star-hopping hermit. The film does a wonderful job presenting Draper's isolation and how he copes with it. His loneliness gets so bad that he begins to have visions of his fallen crewmen.
Listen, aren't you even going to talk to me? Mac, what's bugging you? For God's sake, say hello to me. What are you sore about? Oh, Mac, you can't act this way. Mac, I haven't heard a human voice in 4 months. 4, Mac. I haven't heard your voice. Mac, say anything to me, please. For God's sake, talk to me, say anything. Oh, God, please. Talk to me, say anything. Please, God, say anything, Mac. For God. All right. Here's another note for you boys in survival. For you geniuses in human factors. A guy can lick the problems of heat, water, shelter, food. I know, I've done it. And here's the hairiest problem of all. Isolation. Being alone. Boy, here's where he'll crack. Here's where he'll go under. I know. I had great training, including 2 months in the isolation chamber. But when I was in that chamber, I knew I was coming out. I knew I'd be with people again. But up here on Mars, you gotta face the reality of being alone forever.
The film has beautiful Technicolor photography and does a great job visualizing Draper's loneliness, with many long shots of Draper crossing the barren alien landscape. The second half of the film begins when Draper witnesses an alien mining operation and comes across an escaped slave, played by Victor London, which Draper calls Friday in tribute of Robinson Crusoe itself. This half isn't nearly as good as the first, partially because the racism and colonialism from the original text echoes through the film. Draper chastises Friday into learning English, but makes no effort to learn Friday's language.
What? No. Stone. What? Listen, retarded. I don't know what you're trying to tell me, but we're not budging from this spot till you learn some words. A-okay?
A-okay?
No, idiot. Stone.
A-okay. Stone.
Still, a strong friendship does form. Eventually, the aliens who enslaved Friday begin to track him down, forcing the two to begin trekking towards one of the poles. Once again in survival mode, the film picks up again. The journey feels epic. While larger in budget and scale and ambition than its B-movie brothers, Robinson Crusoe on Mars still has a lot of head-scratching, hilarious moments. For example, why does Draper have a loaded revolver packed in with his clothes on an orbital mission? Was he planning on killing Batman? The monkey playing Mona seems absolutely miserable on set, always screaming and acting terrified. Robinson Crusoe on Mars is not a perfect film by any stretch of the imagination, certainly not the best science fiction of its era, but it is the perfect send-off to the genre of fiction that helped birth sci-fi.
Robinson Crusoe, Robinson Crusoe on Mars. You'll be the astronaut, and I'll be the guy from Mars. Robinson Crusoe, Robinson Crusoe on Mars. We'll be together